The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's tarmac as Captain Sarah Mitchell performed her pre-flight inspection of the Apache helicopter. Her gloved hands moved with practiced precision over every bolt, wire, and rotor blade. 28 years old, with piercing green eyes and auburn hair pulled back in regulation style, Sarah had earned her wings through sheer determination and countless hours of training that would have broken lesser pilots. The Apache AH-64D sat like a predatory insect on the concrete, its tandem cockpit gleaming under the Carolina sun. Sarah had been assigned to this bird for 18 months, and, in that time, she'd logged more combat-ready hours than most pilots achieved in 3 years. Her squadron mates respected her skills, but respect from the enlisted men and junior officers was different from acceptance by the brass. General Marcus Thompson emerged from the command building, his polished boots clicking against the tarmac with military precision. At 54, Thompson was a career soldier who'd climbed the ranks through Vietnam, Desert Storm, and 2 tours in Afghanistan. His weathered face bore the permanent squint of someone who'd spent decades scanning hostile horizons, and his gray hair was cropped so short it barely cast a shadow. Thompson commanded the 82nd Combat Aviation Brigade with an iron fist and old-school mentality that viewed the integration of female pilots as a political necessity rather than a tactical advantage. "Mitchell," the general called out, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. "I see you're babying that machine again." Sarah straightened to attention, her spine rigid as she faced her superior officer. "General Thompson, sir." "Conducting standard pre-flight inspection, sir." Thompson circled the Apache like a predator examining prey. His eyes took in every detail of Sarah's preparation, searching for flaws or shortcuts that would confirm his suspicions about female aviators. He found none, which only seemed to irritate him further. "You know, Mitchell," Thompson said, his tone casual but loaded with implication, "I've been flying rotary wing aircraft since before you were born. Seen a lot of hotshot pilots think they can master the Apache." He paused, letting his words hang in the morning air. "Most of them learn the hard way that this machine doesn't care about your training scores or your gender equality reports." The other pilots and ground crew had begun to gather, sensing the tension that always preceded one of Thompson's informal lectures. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Sarah's crew chief, continued his own inspection routine but kept one ear tuned to the conversation. He'd worked with Sarah for over a year and knew she could fly the Apache better than pilots with twice her experience, but he also knew that challenging General Thompson directly was career suicide. "Sir, I understand the Apache's capabilities and limitations," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the obvious baiting. "I've logged 437 hours in this aircraft type, including 62 hours of combat simulation time." Thompson's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Simulation time. That's cute, Captain." He walked closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly designed to intimidate. "You want to know what separates simulation from reality? When real bullets are flying at your bird, when your instruments are screaming warnings because some insurgent just painted you with a SAM, when you've got 30 seconds to save your aircraft and your crew, that's when we see what kind of pilot you really are." The gathered personnel shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew Thompson's reputation for these confrontations, but there was something different about this one. The general seemed more aggressive than usual, as if Sarah's competence personally offended him. "I've reviewed your file, Mitchell," Thompson continued, his voice dropping to a conversational level that somehow seemed more threatening than shouting. "Impressive scores, glowing recommendations, even a few commendations for your training performance. But, you know what I don't see? I don't see any real-world experience under fire." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. "With respect, sir, my squadron hasn't been deployed to an active combat zone since I was assigned to this unit." "Exactly my point," Thompson said, a thin smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're a peacetime pilot, Captain. All training, no testing. Like a race car that's never left the garage." He turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "You see, people, the military has spent millions of dollars training Captain Mitchell here to fly the most sophisticated attack helicopter in our arsenal. The question is, when the shooting starts, will all that expensive training be worth a damn?" The implications of his words were clear to everyone present.
Thompson wasn't just questioning Sarah's combat readiness, he was questioning whether any woman could handle the stress of actual warfare. It was a challenge that went beyond individual capability to strike at the heart of military integration policies. "Tell you what, Mitchell," Thompson said, his voice taking on a mock-generous tone. "I'm feeling sporting today. There's a training exercise scheduled for this afternoon, Operation Copper Strike. It's designed to test advanced pilot responses to multiple threat scenarios. Complex enough that most of our veteran pilots find it challenging." He paused, enjoying the moment. "Why don't you take the primary seat and show us all what that fancy training of yours can do?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Everyone present understood the stakes. Operation Copper Strike was notorious among the aviation community as one of the most difficult training scenarios in the military. It combined aerial combat maneuvers, close air support, target acquisition, and emergency response protocols into a single, grueling 4-hour exercise. Even experienced combat pilots often struggled to achieve passing scores on their first attempt. Sarah felt the weight of every eye on the tarmac. She knew Thompson was setting her up for failure, creating a public spectacle where her inevitable struggles would serve as evidence supporting his prejudices. The smart play would be to decline respectfully, claim she wasn't fully prepared for such an advanced exercise, and maintain her current standing within the unit. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't fought her way through flight school, survived countless hours of additional training, and endured 2 years of subtle discrimination just to back down when directly challenged. The Apache behind her represented everything she'd worked toward: the chance to prove that skill and determination mattered more than gender or politics. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying across the silent tarmac with crystal clarity, "I accept your challenge. When would you like me to begin the exercise?" Thompson's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Excellent, Captain. Really excellent." He checked his watch with theatrical precision. "Exercise begins at 1400 hours. You'll have a full tactical crew, complete mission briefing, and all standard equipment." His tone suggested he was being generous, though everyone present knew he was simply following standard protocol. "I'll be in the observation tower personally, along with Colonel Bradley and Major Stevens. We want to make sure you get all the support you need." The mention of the other senior officers confirmed what everyone suspected: this wasn't just an impromptu training exercise. Thompson had been planning this confrontation, probably for weeks. The presence of Colonel Bradley, the base commander, and Major Stevens, the head of pilot training, meant that Sarah's performance would be officially recorded and reviewed at the highest levels. As the group began to disperse, Sarah remained by her aircraft, running through mental checklists and preparation routines. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached cautiously, his weathered face showing concern. "Captain," he said quietly, "you sure about this? Copper Strike's got a 60% failure rate, even for pilots with combat experience. The general's not exactly setting you up for success here." Sarah looked at the Apache's cockpit, then back at Rodriguez. "Sergeant, I didn't join the military to play it safe. If General Thompson wants to see what I can do under pressure, then that's exactly what he's going to get." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. What do you need from me and the crew?" "Standard pre-flight plus emergency backup checks on all systems. I want this bird running perfectly when we launch." Sarah's voice was calm and professional, but Rodriguez could see the fire in her eyes. "And, Sergeant? Make sure we have full ammunition loads for all weapons systems. If I'm going to do this exercise, I'm going to do it right." As Rodriguez walked away to prepare the aircraft, Sarah stood alone on the tarmac, watching the heat shimmer rise from the concrete. In 6 hours, she would either prove herself capable of handling the military's most demanding training scenario, or she would confirm every doubt that men like Thompson harbored about women in combat roles. The Apache's engines would soon roar to life, lifting her into a sky where prejudice and politics meant nothing, where only skill and courage determined who lived and who died. Sarah Mitchell had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, though she never imagined it would come in the form of a challenge issued by a general who wanted nothing more than to watch her fail. But failure wasn't in Sarah's vocabulary, and as she walked toward the briefing room to study the mission parameters,
she carried with her the quiet confidence of someone who had never backed down from a fight and didn't plan to start today. The briefing room hummed with quiet tension as Sarah studied the mission parameters for Operation Copper Strike. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the tactical maps spread before her, each one marked with threat zones, target coordinates, and flight corridors that would test every skill she'd acquired during her military career. The exercise was designed to simulate a deep penetration mission into hostile territory, requiring precision flying, split-second decision-making, and the ability to engage multiple targets while avoiding enemy air defenses. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, the exercise coordinator, sat across from Sarah with a stack of classified folders. Harrison was a fair man in his early 40s who'd earned his reputation through solid performance rather than political maneuvering. Unlike General Thompson, he evaluated pilots based purely on their capabilities, though he couldn't entirely hide his concern about the circumstances surrounding this particular exercise. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison began, his voice professional but tinged with wariness, "I want to make sure you understand what you're walking into. Copper Strike isn't just another training mission, it's specifically designed to push pilots beyond their comfort zones. We use it to identify weaknesses in advanced pilots before they're deployed to combat zones." Sarah leaned forward, absorbing every detail of the mission brief. "I understand, sir. What are the primary objectives?" Harrison opened the first folder, revealing detailed satellite imagery of the exercise area. "You'll be conducting a multi-phase operation over a 200 square kilometer range. Phase 1 involves penetrating a simulated enemy air defense network using nap-of-the-earth flying techniques. You'll have to navigate through radar gaps while maintaining radio silence." The complexity was immediately apparent. Nap-of-the-earth flying required pilots to stay below 50 feet altitude, using terrain features to mask their approach from enemy sensors. It was physically and mentally exhausting flying that demanded absolute concentration and perfect coordination between pilot and co-pilot. Phase 2, Harrison continued, requires you to locate and engage 6 high-value targets using different weapons systems. 3 will be stationary armor targets, 2 will be mobile command vehicles, and 1 will be a simulated enemy helicopter. He paused, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. "The enemy helicopter is controlled by Chief Warrant Officer Peterson. He's our best aggressor pilot and has 23 years of combat experience." Sarah nodded, making mental notes about target priorities and engagement sequences. Peterson's reputation preceded him. The man had flown combat missions in every conflict since Grenada and had never been shot down in training exercises. Facing him would be like going head-to-head with a master chess player who knew every move before you made it. "Phase 3 is the real test," Harrison said, his expression growing more serious. "Simulated emergency scenarios will be introduced randomly throughout the mission. These could include engine failures, hydraulic problems, weapons malfunctions, or communication breakdowns. You'll have to complete your mission objectives while dealing with whatever we throw at you." The randomness of the emergency scenarios made preparation almost impossible. Sarah could study procedures and practice responses, but she wouldn't know what problems would occur or when they would happen. It was designed to test pilot judgment under the kind of stress that couldn't be replicated in normal training situations. As Harrison continued the briefing, word of the challenge had spread throughout Fort Braxton like wildfire. In the enlisted quarters, mechanics and support personnel debated Sarah's chances with the intensity of sports fans arguing about their favorite teams. Most respected her skills, but Copper Strike had humbled pilots with far more experience than she possessed. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez worked methodically through the Apache's pre-flight checklist, paying special attention to every system that could potentially fail during the exercise. He'd served with enough pilots to recognize the difference between confidence and arrogance, and Sarah Mitchell definitely fell into the former category. Still, he'd also seen good pilots break under pressure when the stakes were raised too high. "How's she holding up?" asked Corporal Martinez, one of the weapons technicians assigned to load the Apache's armament systems. Rodriguez looked toward the briefing room where Sarah was still studying mission parameters. "She's focused. Probably the most prepared I've ever seen her for any flight." He paused, checking hydraulic fluid levels with practiced precision. "Question is whether being prepared is enough when the whole thing's rigged against you." Martinez nodded grimly. Everyone on the flight line understood the politics behind Thompson's challenge. The general had never made any secret of his opposition to women in combat roles, and Sarah had become an unwitting symbol of everything he resented about military modernization. Inside the briefing room, Sarah absorbed every detail Harrison provided about weather conditions, communication protocols, and equipment specifications. The exercise would be conducted in the mountainous terrain of the Cherokee National Forest, where narrow valleys and sudden elevation changes created natural challenges that enemy air defenses would exploit. "One more thing, Captain," Harrison said as he closed the final folder. "You'll be carrying a full combat load, 30 Hellfire missiles, 1,200 rounds of 30mm cannon ammunition, and 38 Hydra rockets. The Apache will be at maximum gross weight, which affects performance characteristics across the board. A fully loaded Apache handled differently from the lighter configurations used in most training exercises. The additional weight reduced climb rates, increased fuel consumption, and made the aircraft more susceptible to turbulence.
It also meant that any emergency procedures would need to be adjusted for the heavier mass.
Your co-pilot gunner will be Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Stone," Harrison continued. "She's one of our most experienced weapons operators and has flown Copper Strike twice before.
Having her expertise will definitely work in your favor."
Sarah felt a surge of relief at this news. Stone had a reputation as an outstanding gunner who could acquire and engage targets with remarkable speed and accuracy. More importantly, she was known for her calm professionalism under pressure, exactly the kind of partner Sarah would need for such a demanding mission. As the briefing concluded, Sarah walked across the base toward the flight line, her mind processing the tactical challenges ahead. The afternoon sun was climbing toward its peak, and heat waves already shimmered off the tarmac where the Apache waited. Ground crews were completing their final preparations, loading weapons and topping off fuel tanks with the careful precision that characterized military aviation.
Chief Warrant Officer Stone was waiting by the aircraft, reviewing weapons systems checklists with the same methodical attention that Sarah brought to her own preparations.
At 35, Stone was a career Army aviator who'd earned her position through exceptional performance in some of the military's most demanding roles. Her dark hair was streaked with premature gray, a common characteristic among combat veterans who'd seen too much action in too short a time. "Captain Mitchell," Stone said as Sarah approached, her voice carrying the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable with her expertise.
"I've been looking forward to flying with you. Heard good things about your skills from the other pilots."
"Likewise, Chief Stone. I know your reputation, you're exactly the kind of co-pilot I want for this mission."
Sarah's response was genuine. Having Stone as a partner significantly improved their chances of success.
The two women spent the next hour reviewing emergency procedures, weapons employment tactics, and communication protocols. Stone's experience showed in her detailed knowledge of the Apache's capabilities and limitations, while Sarah's technical precision impressed the veteran gunner. Despite the circumstances that had created this mission, both pilots found themselves looking forward to the challenge. General Thompson appeared at the edge of the flight line, accompanied by Colonel Bradley and Major Stevens. The three senior officers maintained careful distance from the aircraft preparations, but their presence served as a constant reminder of the stakes involved in the upcoming exercise.
Thompson checked his watch repeatedly, his impatience evident even from across the tarmac. "You know what this is really about, don't you?" Stone asked quietly as they completed their weapons systems review. Sarah nodded.
"The general wants me to fail publicly so he can justify his opposition to women in combat roles.
He's betting that Copper Strike will be too much for me to handle." "And, what do you think?"
Sarah looked at the Apache's cockpit, then back at Stone. "I think General Thompson is about to learn that underestimating people based on prejudice is a dangerous mistake."
Her voice carried quiet determination rather than bravado.
"I didn't spend 5 years fighting for this opportunity just to fold when someone tries to intimidate me." Stone smiled grimly.
"Good. Because Copper Strike is going to test everything we've got, and then some.
But if we fly smart and work as a team, we can make Thompson eat his words."
As 1400 hours approached, Sarah performed her final pre-flight inspection with Stone reviewing weapons system status.
The Apache was ready for combat literally and figuratively. Every system showed green, ammunition loads were complete, and fuel tanks were topped off. The aircraft represented the pinnacle of military technology, but its effectiveness would ultimately depend on the skills and judgment of the two women who would take it into simulated battle. Rodriguez approached for the final crew chief briefing, his weathered face serious but supportive.
Aircraft is ready, Captain.
All systems nominal, full combat load properly secured, and communications are clear. He paused, meeting Sarah's eyes directly.
Give him hell up there, ma'am. Sarah climbed into the front cockpit while Stone settled into the pilot-gunner position behind her.
The familiar routine of strapping in and running through startup checklists provided a comforting sense of normalcy despite the extraordinary circumstances. As the Apache's twin-turbine engines began their characteristic whine, Sarah felt the machine come alive around her like a living creature preparing for battle. General Thompson's voice crackled through the radio with official mission clearance, his tone professionally neutral despite the personal nature of the challenge.
Apache 27, you are cleared for Operation Copper Strike. Good hunting, Captain.
Sarah keyed her microphone, her voice steady and confident.
27 copies clearance for Copper Strike. Beginning mission now.
The Apache lifted off smoothly, its rotors biting into the thick afternoon air as Sarah pointed the nose toward the exercise area. Behind her, Stone monitored weapons systems and threat displays while scanning the horizon for the challenges that waited ahead. In the observation tower, 3 senior officers settled in to watch what would either be a vindication of female pilots or confirmation of their limitations. The real test was about to begin. The Apache thundered across the North Carolina landscape at 200 feet, its shadow racing over pine forests and rolling hills as Sarah pushed the aircraft toward the exercise boundary. The familiar rhythm of rotor blades filled the cockpit while instruments displayed a steady stream of data about altitude, airspeed, and navigation coordinates. Behind her, Chief Stone monitored threat warning systems and maintained communication with exercise controllers who would soon transform this peaceful training area into a simulated war zone. 2 minutes to exercise boundary, Stone announced through the intercom, her voice calm and professional despite the tension everyone felt.
All systems showing green. Threat warning equipment is active and ready. Sarah acknowledged with a brief key of the microphone while making final adjustments to her flight controls.
The Apache responded to her touch like a finely tuned instrument, its sophisticated fly-by-wire system translating her inputs into precise movements of the main and tail rotors. After 18 months flying this particular aircraft, she knew its personality intimately, how it handled in crosswinds, how quickly it responded to collective changes, and exactly how much power she could demand from the twin-turbine engines. The exercise boundary appeared as a series of landmarks that had been programmed into the Apache's navigation system. Once they crossed that invisible line, Operation Copper Strike would begin in earnest, and every decision Sarah made would be recorded and analyzed by the observers in the command center. General Thompson would be watching every maneuver, waiting for the mistakes that would justify his skepticism about female combat pilots. Crossing boundary now, Sarah announced as they flew over a distinctive ridgeline.
Beginning Phase 1 terrain masking approach to target area Alpha. The transformation was immediate and dramatic.
Stone's threat warning display suddenly lit up with multiple radar contacts as the exercise controllers activated a network of simulated surface-to-air missile sites throughout the training area. The peaceful afternoon flight had instantly become a deadly game of cat and mouse where detection meant mission failure or simulated death. Multiple SAM sites active, Stone reported, her voice taking on the focused intensity of combat operations. I'm reading SA-6 and SA-8 signatures bearing 030 and 090 degrees.
Recommend immediate descent to nap of the Earth altitude.
Sarah pushed the collective down sharply, dropping the Apache toward the treetops while simultaneously pulling the aircraft into a hard right turn. The maneuver was aggressive enough to press both pilots against their seats as the helicopter dove toward the forest canopy like a hunting falcon. This was where years of training either paid off or revealed their inadequacy. Flying at extreme low altitude required split-second reflexes and perfect coordination between pilot and aircraft. The ground rushed up to meet them as Sarah leveled off at 40 feet above the trees, using the forest itself as a shield against enemy radar. At this altitude, the margin for error was measured in heartbeats rather than minutes. A moment's inattention, a sudden wind gust, or a misjudged turn could send them crashing into the canopy with no hope of recovery. "Beautiful flying," Stone murmured as Sarah threaded the Apache through a narrow valley, staying below the ridgelines that would mask them from the simulated SAM sites. "Target area Alpha is bearing 045 degrees, range 12 kilometers. The target area contained the first phase objectives, 3 simulated tank positions that needed to be destroyed using precision Hellfire missile strikes. But reaching them required navigating through a gauntlet of threats that would challenge every aspect of Sarah's flying skills. The route took them through mountainous terrain where radar shadows provided temporary concealment, but also created turbulence that made precision flying exponentially more difficult. 5 minutes into the approach, the first emergency scenario struck without warning. Alarms suddenly filled the cockpit as the Apache's flight control computer detected a simulated hydraulic failure in the primary flight control system. The aircraft's handling characteristics changed instantly as backup systems engaged, requiring Sarah to adjust her flying technique to compensate for reduced control authority. "Primary hydraulics failure," Stone announced, following emergency checklists with practiced efficiency. "Backup system is online, but we've lost approximately 30% control effectiveness." Sarah felt the difference immediately in the way the Apache responded to her control inputs. Turns required more force and took longer to initiate, while maintaining precise altitude became significantly more challenging. Flying nap of the Earth with degraded flight controls was like performing surgery while wearing thick gloves, possible, but requiring extraordinary concentration and skill. "Controls are mushy but manageable," Sarah replied, adjusting her flying technique to accommodate the simulated failure. Continuing approach to target area Alpha. The observers in the command center watched Sarah's performance with intense interest. Colonel Bradley noted how smoothly she adapted to the emergency situation, while Major Stevens documented her precise adherence to emergency procedures. General Thompson remained silent, but his expression suggested he was waiting for the cumulative stress to overwhelm the female pilot's capabilities. As they approached the target area, Stone began acquiring the simulated enemy vehicles with the Apache's sophisticated targeting system. The longbow radar could detect and classify targets at ranges exceeding 8 kilometers, but using active radar also revealed their position to enemy air defenses. It was a calculated risk that required precise timing and tactical judgment. "I have 3 targets," Stone announced as thermal images appeared on her weapons display. 2 main battle tanks at grid coordinates 774-231, and 1 command vehicle at grid 776-228. Requesting clearance to engage. Sarah maneuvered the Apache to an attack position while simultaneously monitoring threat warning displays for signs of enemy response to their presence. The simulated tanks were positioned in defensive formations that provided mutual support against aerial attack, requiring careful selection of engagement sequences to avoid exposing the helicopter to concentrated defensive fire. "Cleared to engage primary targets," Sarah replied, holding the Apache in a stable hover while Stone lined up the first Hellfire missile shot. "Watch for defensive reactions from the target area." The first Hellfire launched with a sharp bang and streak of flame as its rocket motor ignited. The missile streaked toward its target in a high arc designed to attack enemy armor from above where it was most vulnerable. Stone immediately began acquiring the second target while monitoring the first missile's flight path through the Apache's sophisticated fire control system. "First target destroyed," Stone announced as the missile found its mark in a brilliant flash that the exercise computers registered as a successful kill. "Engaging second target now." But success brought immediate retaliation as the exercise controllers activated simulated anti-aircraft artillery around the target area. The threat warning system screamed alerts as multiple gun positions began tracking the Apache's location. Sarah had seconds to react before concentrated defensive fire would make their position untenable. "Taking fire from multiple positions," Sarah announced, pulling the Apache into an aggressive evasive maneuver that combined rapid altitude changes with sharp directional turns. "Stone, can you continue engagement while we're maneuvering?" The challenge of maintaining weapons accuracy while the aircraft was pulling multiple G-forces in evasive flight pushed both pilots to their limits. Stone had to compensate for the helicopter's violent movements while keeping the targeting system locked onto enemy vehicles that were themselves beginning to move in response to the attack. "Steady as you can," Stone replied through gritted teeth as she fought to maintain target lock despite the Apache's gyrations.
I need 5 seconds for a clean shot. Sarah briefly stabilized the aircraft while Stone launched the second Hellfire, then immediately resumed evasive maneuvering as simulated tracer fire filled the air around them. The Apache's threat warning system provided a constant stream of audio alerts as enemy weapons tracked their movements, creating an environment of controlled chaos that tested every aspect of pilot training. The second missile found its target just as Sarah pulled the Apache behind a ridgeline that provided momentary protection from ground fire. 2 targets down, 1 remaining in the target area, but the intensity of defensive fire meant they needed a new approach vector for the final attack. Defensive fire is too heavy for a direct approach, Sarah analyzed while studying the tactical situation. I'm going to swing wide and come in from the north where the terrain masks us from most of the gun positions. The maneuver required flying a lengthy detour around mountainous terrain while maintaining the low altitude necessary to avoid radar detection. It was exactly the kind of tactical thinking that separated good pilots from great ones, the ability to adapt original plans when circumstances changed, even under extreme pressure. As they repositioned for the final attack, the second emergency scenario activated. This time, the Apache's targeting system began showing degraded performance, simulating battle damage that would make weapons employment significantly more challenging. Stone would have to rely on backup systems and manual procedures to engage the final target. Targeting system showing multiple failures, Stone reported while switching to backup modes. I can still engage, but accuracy will be reduced and engagement time will be longer. Sarah nodded grimly as she maneuvered the Apache into position for the final attack. With degraded flight controls and damaged targeting systems, they were operating the Apache at the edge of its capabilities while facing an enemy that was fully alert and aggressively defending. It was exactly the kind of scenario that combat pilots might face in actual warfare, where equipment failures and battle damage were facts of life rather than training scenarios. The final approach took them through a narrow canyon where radar shadows provided concealment but also created severe turbulence from wind patterns bouncing off rock walls. Sarah fought to maintain control as the Apache was buffeted by conflicting air currents while Stone struggled to acquire the final target with damaged systems. Target acquired, Stone finally announced after what felt like hours but was actually less than 30 seconds. Engaging now. The final Hellfire missile streaked toward its target as Sarah immediately began evasive maneuvering to escape the target area before enemy reinforcements could respond. Behind them, the exercise computers registered the destruction of all 3 primary targets, completing Phase 1 of Operation Copper Strike successfully despite the multiple emergency scenarios they'd encountered. But Phase 1 was only the beginning. As they departed Target Area Alpha, Stone's threat warning display began showing new contacts as the exercise controllers prepared to introduce Phase 2's challenges. The most difficult parts of the mission still lay ahead, and General Thompson was undoubtedly noting that they'd only managed to complete the initial objectives with significant effort. Sarah checked her fuel consumption and weapons remaining while plotting a course toward Phase 2 objectives. They'd used more fuel than planned due to the aggressive maneuvering required to avoid simulated enemy fire, and the emergency scenarios had cost precious time that might be critical later in the mission. Every decision from this point forward would need to be perfect if they were going to complete Operation Copper Strike successfully. The real test was just getting started. The Apache raced through mountain valleys at breakneck speed as Sarah pushed toward the Phase 2 target area, every sense heightened by the knowledge that the most challenging part of Operation Copper Strike lay ahead. The successful completion of Phase 1 had given both pilots confidence, but they'd used more fuel and ammunition than planned, leaving smaller margins for the complex scenarios still to come. Contact bearing 270 degrees, range 15 kilometers, Stone announced as her radar detected movement in the target area. Looks like our mobile targets are already in motion. The Phase 2 objectives required engaging 2 command vehicles that would be actively trying to avoid destruction while coordinating defensive measures against air attack. Unlike the stationary tanks they just destroyed, these targets would use terrain and camouflage to make targeting difficult, forcing the Apache crew to hunt them down like a predator tracking elusive prey. Sarah banked the helicopter toward the new bearing while maintaining the ultra-low altitude that kept them invisible to enemy radar systems. The degraded flight controls from their simulated hydraulic failure continued to make precision flying more demanding, requiring constant attention to maintain proper altitude clearance above the forest canopy.
2 minutes to target area, Sarah announced while scanning the terrain ahead for potential ambush positions.
What's our weapons status? Stone checked her displays before responding.
26 Hellfire missiles remaining, full load of 30mm ammunition, and 35 Hydra rockets.
The targeting system is still operating on backup modes, but it's functional.
As they approached the target zone, the Apache's threat warning system detected multiple radar emissions from air defense sites that had repositioned since their last engagement. The enemy was adapting to their tactics, moving defensive systems to counter the routes and approaches that had worked in Phase 1. New SAM positions active, Stone reported as her display showed fresh threat indicators. Looks like they've repositioned to cover our previous ingress routes.
We'll need a completely different approach vector.
Sarah studied the tactical situation while maintaining their high-speed transit toward the target area. The mobile command vehicles would be communicating with air defense sites, coordinating a defensive network designed to trap the Apache in overlapping fields of fire.
Success required staying one step ahead of an enemy that was learning and adapting in real time. The first mobile target appeared on Stone's thermal imaging system as a faint heat signature moving between tree lines. The command vehicle was following a predetermined route that kept it concealed under forest canopy while maintaining communication with other defensive elements. Engaging it would require precise timing and perfect coordination between pilot and gunner. "I have contact on the first command vehicle," Stone announced while refining the target track with her sensors. "It's moving northeast along the tree line, speed approximately 40 km per hour. Sarah maneuvered the Apache to an attack position while simultaneously monitoring multiple threat indicators. The targeting solution required them to maintain visual contact with the moving vehicle while avoiding exposure to the SAM sites that were actively hunting for their helicopter. It was a three-dimensional chess game played at lethal speeds.
"Steady for engagement," Stone called as she prepared to launch a Hellfire missile at the moving target. "I need 10 seconds for a clean shot." The Apache held rocksteady despite the turbulence and degraded flight controls as Sarah demonstrated the precision flying that had earned her reputation among fellow pilots. Stone's missile launched in a streak of flame and smoke, tracking toward the command vehicle with deadly accuracy guided by the helicopter's sophisticated fire control system. The target exploded in a brilliant fireball as the Hellfire found its mark in the male-dominated world of military aviation, where steel birds worth $35 million slice through hostile skies. Respect isn't given, it's earned at 30,000 feet with bullets flying.
What happens when a seasoned general's casual dare to a female pilot backfires so spectacularly that it doesn't just humble him, but forces him to abandon everything he's built over 3 decades of service? This is the story of Captain Sarah Mitchell, whose steady hands and unbreakable spirit turned a moment of military mockery into a career-defining mission that would shake the very foundations of the armed forces hierarchy. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one shooting at you from the ground, it's the one sitting in the command center, underestimating what you're capable of when everything is on the line.